don't want any nukes around me because they're a liability.
Right, right. You think that's it? You think that's where the warfare is going with in the near future?
Yeah, I've got it on very, very good authority that the military is knees deep in scalar weapons. So Maxwell's original equations were butchered by Heaviside, and we lost the scalar potential. And it's really as simple as like one equation just has to be slightly modified, where like the magnetic field times the del cross operator equals the magnetic vector potential instead of equaling zero. Like just one equation that got reduced.
Can you
And
explain what the scalar is? I don't know what that is.
yeah, so the best way to think about a scalar wave is if I have a wave that's going this way, and I have an exact reflection of that wave going the opposite way, and they overlap one another perfectly,
Hmm.
then they're going to cancel out, and they're going to create mathematically nothing.
Hmm.
But the reality is there's not nothing there still. When you do that, and you can do that with like a phase conjugate crystal or mirror, and it's basically a metamaterial, but not like some very complicated metamaterial to create. It automatically, like if I were to look in a phase conjugate mirror, all I would see are my irises because every point of light that bounces off the mirror bounces directly back at the source.
Hmm.
So this is how you can actually manipulate a scalar beam. And when you do this, there's no electric or magnetic fields, so you can't actually measure it with anything. But you're basically sending a longitudinal wave, like a sound wave, through the ether, through this energy that's all around us everywhere.
Right.
And this is what they manipulate in order to beam energy at a distance. And you take two of these waves, these beams of scalar potential, and you cross them, intersect them, and you create an interference pattern, which allows the energy to be basically remanifested from one location to the next. You're beaming the energy from here, and it's appearing over here. And you can even do the opposite, which is you can pull energy out of here and then have it appear over here as well, which is fundamentally teleportation. Now,
Right.
we only really acknowledge right now quantum teleportation, like teleportation of certain states and potentially energy, but we're going to get to the point where macro scale teleportation is accepted.
And you're saying like the military could weaponize teleportation?
Oh yeah,
Like, I
definitely.
mean, that's what the whole flight is about, but the way you just described it is that it comes out somewhere else. We don't know where the plane went if it went through a wormhole, but you're
Yeah,
describing something else where it's like we can shoot something with the beam, for lack of a better word, and then send it somewhere or elsewhere, not at all. We don't even know where it goes.
yeah, and that's the thing. So a lot of people ask, well, hey, where'd the plane go? Where'd the plane go? Obviously, I don't have two videos on the other side to be like, hey guys, this is the coordinates of where the plane showed up. And we have coordinates of where the
Not
plane literally
yet.
disappeared, which makes it pretty easy to figure out that part.
Right.
But the thing we do have is all the rest of the investigation MH370. Like Marc Dugain, famous French author, and Sergio Cavulio, they went to the Maldives and interviewed some witnesses in the Maldives that all saw the plane. In fact, I was just talking to Florence Changi earlier as well, and she went there as well, but she came to the conclusion that they must have saw some other plane, but
Hmm.
it's like 15 or 20 people that don't really see jumbo jets, and they're seeing the red and white stripe of Malaysian Airlines. And then it's like, where would the plane go? If it didn't crash in the ocean, if there's no debris field anywhere on Earth, either this plane went to some other dimension, which I don't really think it did, or it had to have gone somewhere there's no commercial airports, because you land this plane at a commercial airport, you got way too many witnesses, hundreds, thousands.
Right.
It had to have gone to a military base. And the place where everybody said this plane went was Diego Garcia military base, which is like also super secret. And some refugees washed ashore there like 3 years ago. We didn't talk about this in the Tim Pool thing because I didn't
Hmm.
know.
Yeah.
But like 3 years ago, refugees washed ashore there and they were just never allowed to leave.
What?
They like have literally been held captive there, prisoner for 3 years.
From where?
You're like,
Where were they from?
I don't know, one of those islands out there, like
That's
around that
crazy.
area. Supposedly the story makes no sense. We're trying to get to Canada. I'm like, you're on the wrong side of the
Sounds like
world.
an M.
Like,
Night Shyamalan movie.
Yeah, right. All of this does. That's crazy. So because they've trespassed in some secret place, now they're being held hostage, and that's that. Do they have
yeah, and there's
family?
like a humanitarian crisis. They were, and in fact, like people from the UK, these humanitarian groups wanted to go visit and see the conditions, and the government wouldn't even let them come visit. And it
Whoa.
was like been this huge thing. And I'm going there, I'm like, guys, you don't realize like why would they, if unless there's nothing going, if there was nothing going on at this base, why would we be holding these people prisoner, not letting them leave? Like clearly we don't want them to see anything. We don't want them to report about anything they're seeing on the base, or like
Right.
so that's the perfect location to land the plane. It's also the perfect location for the debris that was found. Like I actually do believe the debris is from MH370, just not enough to prove a plane crashed. And it's in the wrong part of the world. this debris washes ashore in Africa.
Right.
And they're trying to say that it drifted from off the coast of Australia.
Hmm.
Like, just look at the currents, guys. Currents say that the debris should have washed ashore in Australia if that's the case. It goes to the east down there.
Right.
You're like, oh, it went 3,000 miles against the currents and somehow twice as fast as the currents flow and got to Africa. Like, it makes no sense. So I know for sure one of two things is screwy. Either that debris is not from MH370 or those satellite pings are fabricated. And I think it's pretty apparent based on these like comments by the CEO guy. And here's the response when it turned out that the message logs had been tampered with. Malaysian Airlines wishes to state that Malaysian Airlines has provided full cooperation and assistance to all respective authorities on the investigation for MH370, including the submission of relevant documents necessary for investigation. How is that even a response to the allegations that there's messages that were tampered with? Like,
Wow.
that's just being like, hey, the authority told us that we should tamper the messages, and so we did. And like,
That's interesting.
crazy.
When you say that you think it's the debris from the actual plane, you think that's from the fire that you talked about, and then
Yeah, I
it's
think
falling
that the
apart?
plane was damaged, and also I think when it landed, they just ripped some pieces off of it, or even disassembled it, and just threw them in the ocean at Diego Garcia. And turns out, you look at the currents from Diego Garcia, perfectly matches all the debris washing ashore in Africa the way that it did.
That's
And it's
interesting.
like, yeah, I know people don't want to believe that conspiracies are possible, but guys, Diego Garcia is like the only place this plane could have gotten to, unless it's on the moon somewhere on the dark side of the moon or just whatever, right?
There's too many weird things with the story in general. You know, before we even saw the videos that you were sharing with us back in January, and you know, everyone's seen those by now, I'm sure. You know, there's so many weird stories with it, like the cell phones of the families. What was the deal with that?
Yeah, the cell phones is another huge clue where it's like, I honestly consider this a little bit like P. Diddy and so Epstein and some of this stuff where it's like, we see all this evidence, but it just doesn't like register. And then all of a sudden there's this big thing that comes up where it's like, oh, now he's being arrested and raided. And you're like, oh, turns out he was a sleazeball the whole time and all the evidence was right out there. And he like probably sexually assaulted Justin Bieber and we should have noticed,
Yep,
right?
yep.
It's kind of like that where it's like the phones were still ringing for 4 days. The families are
That's right.
freaking out. They're showing the phones ringing on national
So
television. 19 families are signing joint legal statements to the government asking them to look into the fact that cell phones were ringing because they would have to have some connection. They can't be the bottom of the ocean if that's the case.
Right.
And if it was just one or two, that's one thing, but it's 19 guys. So you look at all this and you're like, okay, wait, it's obvious the plane didn't actually crash. Like planes leave giant debris fields when they crash.
Mm-hmm.
And we have like thousands of satellites in outer space. The military does. Like right now, the military is tracking 10,000 satellites right now.
Right.
So people are like, are they tracking every plane? Yeah, kind of. And
Right.
especially when a plane goes rogue, they're definitely tracking it. And I'm guessing it takes less than 5 minutes for them to highlight that a plane just went rogue and off, the tracking system.
It seems completely obvious that the people who run these satellites, like Lockheed, our government, the Five Eyes you mentioned, they know what happened. If they're like when the Malaysian flight went missing, was the global infrared mapping happening already?
Yeah,
Do you know?
it had already gone online in 2013, like fully online. They
Oh, wow.
started
Just
shooting
before.
spy satellites in 2006. And in fact, NROL 22, what we see in the bottom left quarter of the satellite video, that was the first launch of the Sibir system. That's the only reason why we were able to connect it to the Sibir system. And then we find out, oh, yes, there's this infrared spy satellite tracking, mapping the whole planet. Oh, and they're also incorporating mid-Earth and low Earth orbit satellites into it, which is really important because the visualization we see looks like a low Earth orbit satellite. It's like at an angle as well. And this is a constellation of satellites.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have a constellation of satellites, what you're not looking down through each one. It's not like bring up this satellite. It's like, no, just beam the data to ground-based computers, and then we'll have a program, and I'll just pull up the program, and I'll go anywhere I want. If we had coverage, then I can see whatever that coverage was at that time and that location. And it's just like we did with Pluto. Like when we flew the, what do you call it?
Voyager.
Whatever not the rover, but like, yeah, the thing we did our flyby of like Pluto, we're not like taking visual images of it in optical. Like we're scanning it, we're beaming it, sometimes with like synthetic aperture radar,
Right.
which basically just beams it and maps it. And then they do a recreation using computers to see it. That's what we do with our tracking system now too. And it works at daytime and nighttime. And so it's like, technically what you're seeing in the satellite video is a computer rendering, but it's not After Effects. You're seeing
Right.
like the government's integrated software with like some type of Google Earth
It's a
technology.
collage, right? Isn't it like a
Yeah.
digital collage of all of these images that they're mapping? And essentially, aren't they just able to see anything happening in real time, even terrible events as they're going down? And then couldn't they intervene, but they don't? Like, there's so many things that happen in history recently, that are pretty horrific stuff. And you'd think if they could see it, they'd intervene, but they can't because then it would let everyone know, hey, we're this false god patrolling the skies. Is that like where you're at with it too?
Oh, 100%. And I think that's part of the reason why they can't tell you about the surveillance capabilities. Because once you know, then you're like, why are you letting all this evil shit happen?
Yeah, dude.
Like,
Like since we last talked in January, and I've been going down the Lockheed Martin stuff and these spy satellites. You find yourself in conversations, and people say, "Oh, my phone. I'm worried about my phone listening." I'm like, it's so much worse than the phone. I'm like, these satellites are here watching everything you do constantly. There's no hiding, unfortunately.
no, no, there's no hiding on this planet. And if you look at the Sibbers video on Lockheed Martin's website, you see how huge these scans are. Like they're thousands of miles. So there is no hiding whatsoever from the U.S. government. And that was 10 years ago. And
Right.
they're actually planning a new upgraded version. I think is going to start in 2026. So whatever they're
Great.
doing, they're about to make it even better,
Oh,
which
great.
scares me because like I feel like we're probably already past the point where it's like the Dark Knight, where they've got like echolocation of like every single, even inside your house. Like they're gonna see you through the ceiling
Yeah.
at this point.
Yeah. I think that's very possible. I think that's already happening, to be
But
honest.
the overall point is, if there was a plane flying rogue for eight
Yes.
hours and then crashed into the ocean,
Yes.
we would 1000% have seen it. Like no
Right.
question, no doubt at all. Even if somehow we somehow didn't have a satellite in that area scanning that region, the next day we would have operationalized one to look at the huge area where the plane would have crashed and would have seen a massive debris field, and we'd have satellite imagery of it. The satellite imagery that like they had this thing going on where commercial satellite imagery was being combed over by like random people.
Hmm.
The quality and resolution of that is garbage. Like you
Really?
can't even make out what a thing is if it's on the water. And so
Wow.
this led to a lot of people being like, "Oh, I see a piece of the plane there," but they're like literally just a mind playing tricks on you
Of
or whatever.
course.
What the government has, they can watch you working out on the ground. They can
For sure.
probably read a book that you are reading in front of you and see it with the satellite.
I,
So
I think they can read your mind.
they can
Like
probably read your mind because
based on
truthfully,
your
when you start getting into wormholes and ER equals EPR, which is the idea that macroscopic wormhole is equivalent to quantum teleportation
hmm,
from the quantum mechanical perspective, you realize that what Ben Rich said is very relevant, that all points in space and time are connected.
hmm,
And if that's the case, then psychotronic and psychotropic warfare becomes a very real possibility.
right.
They can influence your decisions with social media. They can basically create a profile of you based on your habits and your interactions to determine what you're going to do at any given moment.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think a lot of it now is like this. I don't know if it's fourth or fifth generational warfare where it was like control over people's minds,
Right.
but now we're entering sixth generational warfare, which is going to be literally control of time and space itself.
Yeah. I think we're there. So when you look at the Malaysian stuff, and we can get into the wormhole now and all that. What do you see that as? Has your opinion changed since we last talked over the last year? Is this warfare? Is this experimentation on behalf of some governments working in tandem, perhaps?
Yeah, I think still that espionage is makes the most sense. Actually, right after we talked, there was the letter to Ashton Forbes. It was like 4 days after we spoke, actually. And that was the part. So when I spoke to you, I still wasn't 100% sure if this was like a rescue attempt or something.
Hmm.
But the letter to Ashton Forbes, and I just actually uploaded with Daniel Price another interview earlier today. If people want to check that out, where we go through the letter, the entire thing. As time has gone on, I'm sure that letter was legitimate, and it basically wanted me to keep going, wanted me to look into the science, wanted me to not talk about Miami Mall aliens. Um, and it presents this idea that like the CIA or the intelligence community planned this operation from the beginning. It was always espionage against China. Robert J. O'Neill, the guy who killed Osama bin Laden. Don't at me, my conspiracy theorist friends. I know they're going to say he didn't actually kill him, whatever. Anyway, he posted on September 8th saying that Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 was never a mystery and it was always a warning to China. And he's on the mark. Those Freescale semiconductor engineers, like they were developing microchips that were going to allow us to interact with quantum worlds, which means gravity manipulation, free energy, anything that you could produce using negative energy, warp drives, all of this stuff becomes possible. And the reason why the semiconductors are so important, microchips, like you look at AI, look at Nvidia's stock price gone up like 20-fold
Yeah.
over the last like 3 years or so. It's all about getting your microchip as small as possible. The
Right.
smaller you take this electrical engineering concept, and the closer you get to interacting with this energy that's on the Planck scale, the smallest scales, the more powerful the effects. And what that means is you want to make a tiny microchip that's got the right chemical elements in there that's creating the interaction you need, and then you want to scale it up with a massive array and turn it onto a wafer, which is just a chip that's
Right.
like macro size. And these chips are like the size of your nail, but they have, billions of transistors on them.
Right.
And that's why we did this to the plane. I'm 100% sure is that we couldn't let China get this technology. They're catching up. And I think now they've already, part of the reason why I've been allowed to talk about this most likely is that they've already figured it out. It's 10 years later. They saw those videos. They probably had other spy stuff going on as well. So they figured the technology out. And now we're at a point where it's coming out one way or another. It's just a matter of how quickly it's going to come out and how the world kind of adapts to it. So yeah,
There's
that's what I think that the kind of motivation here was, because it's not a situation where it's just a drone randomly filming a civilian airliner. No, that drone was operationalized to intercept that plane and record it,
right.
and probably record it because they want to get intelligence on how those orbs are operating. Like they might not have used this weapon that often. This is the kind of weapon where once you use it, it's now exposed to everybody, especially if some videos leak onto the internet about it. So now all your adversaries are going, whoa, look at that crazy weapon. They just
Right.
teleported a plane. How did they do that? Let's figure out how to do that ourselves. And now we want it as well.
Right. Just like the atom bomb, when you release new stuff, there's a race to get this tech out. And then speaking of tech and what you're talking about with those engineers that were on the plane, which is another part of the story that's insane. That all these people were on that plane connected to this company working on this technology. And a lot of these weird disasters, these disaster scenarios, like, we've had someone on the show talk about a shooting that happened in Buffalo, and people will reference that one of the men who was killed was working on like a water powered car system. You keep hearing stories of like this tech that could be great for humanity somehow getting destroyed or bought out. That's something you come across a lot when you're looking into what's to come with the future of energy.
Oh, 100%.